This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1880, 1880, and you know what that means. That means this is a 10th episode show where we discuss a topic of general interest. And today we are going to have yours truly being interviewed by Kate McKay. She is a life coach, a coach on a lot of things, and I think you'll really enjoy this interview on a lot of levels. But I want to tell you, yesterday I interviewed what some would call a far-left feminist author, Naomi Wolf, and it was a fascinating show about her new book, The Bodies of Others, the New Authoritarians, COVID-19, and the war against the human. That's what she talks about. And I got to give her a huge compliment. This book was well researched. She did real investigative journalism, and that will be coming up on the show as well. Really interesting interview. Not a guest I would typically interview. So I thought it was really, really good. And we'll have that one coming up for you soon. But today, before we get into the interview with yours truly, being interviewed by somebody else, I want to just talk about a couple of things. Number one, the Banana Republic, which is the new America, sadly. As you, I'm sure, know by now, just a couple of days ago, former President Trump's house was raided by the FBI. Now, if the FBI does not manufacture evidence or plant evidence, and they actually have something legitimate that a crime has been committed, then, hey, show us, show the American people. But this is absolutely insane. I mean, the level of evidence they need to produce to make this search and this raid justified is absolutely enormous. Or they're probably going to put Trump back into office. I mean, just because this will just galvanize so many voters. It's just truly unbelievable that this happened. I am absolutely in shock, but we shall see. Okay, I want to show you a couple things on the screen here. Number one, I just got to make a comment about this before we go into this, but on my travels, my recent trip to Alaska, Sacramento, Seattle, Reno, Tahoe, I got to make a comment because I was mentioning this to Ashley this morning. You are noticing it, of course, it's no surprise, but just another of so many comments about inflation. I was amazed at the cost of the ride-sharing companies, Uber and Lyft. I mean, these prices have just skyrocketed. And now they've pretty much put the taxis out of business, taken a huge bite out of their business. So there's, of course, less competition. But here's the thing I want to tell you. Have you thought of this? Of course, the government and governments around the world are on this massive power grab, limiting freedom, taking away our liberties, setting things up for the future where we can be more controlled. And just compare the idea of going out and hailing a taxi or calling a taxi company and how fragmented that business was. There was always some kind of ride you could get, right? But now Uber and Lyft have put these companies out of business. And of course, the government has been courting big tech, using them as a proxy for all kinds of unsavory things, limiting freedom of speech, etc. And so just think about the level of control the government can exert with just two dominant players through big tech companies and these ride sharing companies, right? Hey, if they don't like your social score, they can cut you off. They can, of course, see where you go. With a standard taxi the old way, they couldn't do that. They didn't know where you went. It wasn't tracked. They don't know what time of day you took a ride. You could pay in cash. The whole transaction could be private. But now, not that much. Of course, with our phones, they're tracking us. We all know that. And they're listening to us and hot micing the phones and all kinds of unsavory things. But folks, the tech dystopia in which we are living is just becoming crazy. It's beyond the pale, to use the old expression, of what government can do and what they're setting us up for. Think about the electric car phenomenon, right? So electric cars, hey, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. I don't know. I owned 2 Teslas. As I told you, the first one was okay. The second one was terrible. It was a total lemon. And after much complaining, over 10 months, I actually got Tesla to take the car back and give me a refund. Yeah, can you believe it? For a long time, they said, no, we're not going to do it. We're Tesla. We're beyond reproach. We're so great, right? And finally, they did the right thing and they gave me a refund, so great. But think about these electric cars and look, they have their advantages and disadvantages for sure. But the electric grid is much more centralized and much easier to control than the gasoline grid. I mean, think of those dystopian movies we've seen. What was that one with, I don't like those movies. I think they're stupid, but they were box office hits, so what am I missing? The one with the gorgeous, beautiful Charlize Theron, right? What was that movie called? Was that like Mad Max or something? Whatever. Anyway, I don't know. Where they're all looking for gasoline and they're in the desert and all these sort of dystopian movies we saw about shortages and so forth. It's much easier to control a centralized power grid. And think about the price of electricity. I mean, they can easily raise that. And they can control these cars electronically, centrally. The charging stations, the range is much lower. Just think about the world we're going into and the trap we're going into. Okay? Just really think about that. All right, enough of that. Enough of this. I know, some of you out there are thinking, oh, this is tinfoil hat stuff. Well, they used to call them conspiracy theories, but now they're just conspiracy facts. It's sad state of affairs, folks. Okay, so on the screen, if you are seeing the video, our Empowered Investor Pro community, you got to read this article, folks. I just posted it in here, and it's about skyrocketing rents. Of course, we got all kinds of great stuff. Our video archive, suggestions, feedback, topics, and community. We got a bunch of very active people in here. But this article, I want you to pay particular attention to because it is really fascinating. And it's from one of these great newsletters I get. And it talks about why is rent skyrocketing. You may have seen this article out there, but it says that 71% of renters had a rent hike in the last year. The average rent increase was 14.6%. Certain hotspots, Miami, San Diego, Austin, rents were up on average 25%. Yeah, wow. Can you imagine rent going from $3,000 a month to $4,000 a month? Folks, this kind of stuff is happening all over the place. We are seeing it with our own clients. 4 out of every 10 renters spend more than 30% of their gross income on rent. More than half of all landlords cite market demand as the reason for rent hikes. Look at these charts, okay? 71% of people, rent has gone up in the past year. And by the way, Blackstone is taking over the world. They own so much real estate. Open Door, Zillow, by the way, on a future episode, I want to talk all about this Open Door investigation and the regulators attacking them. We'll talk about whether it's justified or not. But, these monopolistic big companies are just taking over, folks. And we as investors can either ride on their coattails because they do a much better job of optimizing their portfolio and raising rents than mom and pop landlords do. I've said that for many, many years, and that is simply the truth. But rents are skyrocketing. So this chart, okay, now, if you're not looking at the video, I'll just explain it to you, okay? I love it, Ricky Ricardo. Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Yeah, I know some of you are way too young to remember that, but it was a funny thing. All right, rent hikes increase with landlord size. Mom and pop renters, okay? Only 57% of those landlords with 5 units or fewer increased rents. But the mid-size landlords, now they're calling this 100 to 500 units, 1 to 500 doors, okay? So I guess I'm a mid-size landlord. Yes, I am. Hey, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm not a conglomerate. I don't have over 10,000 doors. So 78% of those landlords increased rents. But of the big landlords, the conglomerates, they call them, these 10,000 plus units, 85% of them. So the big landlords are doing a much better job of optimizing their rental income. Okay, most renters don't have rent control. We know that, thankfully, which also means they don't have housing shortages as bad in those markets as they do in others. Okay, rent control does not work. We've said that over and over now. Here's another interesting thing I want to share with you. And I shared this on one of our Empowered Investor Pro Zoom meetings yesterday. We have 2 Zoom meetings this week, by the way, Empowered Investor Pro members. The other one is tomorrow. This is pretty amazing because this bucks the trend of what you'd normally expect. The largest rent increases over the last year were in the smallest units. Unusual, right? Because think about the typical formula for what people want as a rental. They want the cookie cutter 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, single family home. That's always been a great rental. You know, hey, maybe 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. If it's a 2-story unit, it's probably going to have a half bath downstairs. Okay, but what's amazing here is that the smaller units had the biggest rent increases. Why is that? Right? Why is that? Well, I think it's largely driven by the increasing single population. Because, of course, I've told you, the government and the corporatocracy does not like marriage. Now, they probably like marriage over and over so they can have repeat customers because, hey, people spend money on weddings and they reorganize their finances and they move things around, and that makes money for the big corporations, right? The corporatocracy profits from that. But then there's a whole divorce industry, the divorce industrial legal complex that makes money there. And, you know, it's always, folks, follow the money. Like the Watergate informant Deep Throat, they called him, said, follow the money. And that's always the truth for everything in life. Follow the frickin' money. But there's much more money in separating people than there is coupling them up. I've explained it before. You got to have 2 sofas. You got to have 2 beds instead of 1 marriage bed. You got to have 2 coffee makers. You got to have 2 of everything if everybody lives single. So you want to split them up. You want to breed discontent in marriage so people will divorce and split up. You want to promote a feminist agenda. Hey, you know, the government can be my husband. I don't need a man. Gloria Steinem, what'd she say? She said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, right? So, you know, the point is, folks, look at people need each other. This is human nature. I mean, you know, coupling up, pair bonding has been a thing since the beginning of time. People can provide resources, share resources. But if they're single, they got to get their own resources. And hey, you know, we want the other half of the population in the workforce so we can tax them, so they can grow the economy, so they can grow the GDP. You know, so this is the agenda, folks. It's just quite obvious. So in studio apartments, tiny little units, the year-over-year rent increase was 15.3%. In 1-bedroom apartments, it was 15%. Now you move up, and the bigger the home, the smaller the rent increase. 4-bedroom units only got a 10.2% increase. Oddly, This has shifted. It was never this way before. People used to think, oh my God, I would never buy a one bedroom. That'd be a terrible investment. I'd limit my market. Not many renters interested in renting a one bedroom unit, but that's changing. Okay. Now, I don't think this is a huge deal. I think there's, a lot of people home sharing and stuff like that. But I just want to point this out because it's just counter to a trend that has been in existence pretty much forever. All right. That's enough of this. We've got to get on to our show today, but go to empoweredinvestor.com and check out our Empowered Investor Pro membership. We'd love to have you. We have all kinds of interactive Zoom meetings regularly. And if you want a direct contact with me, my team of experts, we're all available for you for interaction and question and answer and individual assistance. So check that out at empoweredinvestor.com. But without further ado, let's get to our 10th episode show today, where I am being interviewed by Coach Kate McKay. Here we go.
So welcome, Jason. I'm totally stoked we're going to get on into it today on Master Your Life.
Happy to. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, what I love about what you, just reading this bio again, was the whole idea that you're providing education, research, resources, and technology. And, that really can go into any kind of system, really, right? When we think about those four components, what I would love to start off with hearing is, Jason, how did you get into real estate? Because this is a place you're deeply passionate about.
Yeah, I grew up poor. I didn't like being poor too much. I sort of realized the differences in like socioeconomic access and stuff when I was in about ninth grade. I remember I got a subscription to Fortune magazine. I used to look at ads in Success magazine, I think it was back in the day, like the old version of Success magazine is probably a completely different magazine now. And I used to respond to the mail order ads in the back and request more information, send self-addressed envelopes, and I'd get a whole bunch of mail on all these different opportunities and things like that. So I guess it really was before ninth grade, actually. Then when I was 16 years old, I saw an infomercial about real estate, and I went and got the guru's book. I read 3 whole chapters of it, put it down, but my mom picked it up and she read the whole thing and started going to seminars, reading more books. And about 2 years later, I'm 18, I'm about to graduate from high school. And she says, Jason, there's a big seminar this weekend in Anaheim by Disneyland in Southern California where I lived. And why don't you go? And so I went to that, and then not knowing what those speakers were talking about and seeing all those speakers over the weekend, I decided I would just get my real estate license so I could learn the basics of investing, and not really for real estate sales, but for investing, because I wanted to be an investor. I somehow realized that was the best vehicle. I still believe that wholeheartedly. I think income property is the most historically proven asset class in the entire world. There's just nothing better. It's a multi-dimensional asset class. It's got really special characteristics that other assets don't have. And I started selling real estate part-time while I was going to college. And when I was 20, I bought my first rental property, still living at home and having a rental property, which was interesting. And then I bought my own property a little later than that. And I kept investing and buying more properties for myself to live in, and just grew into a great thing over many years.
And you're deeply passionate about it. And what I love about you, Jason, is you have a very positive energy about you, and you're very high energy. And I admire that greatly. And I'm just curious about that. Is that something that you've always had, or is this something that you really have to nurture and stoke?
Oh, gosh. Like anybody, it depends what day you ask, right? or what you've got going on. When I was 17 years old, I discovered 4 great influences. And they were through cassette tapes, good old audio cassette tapes, if people remember those. And they were Zig Ziglar, Dennis Waitley, Earl Nightingale, Jim Rohn. And later I discovered Mor Ogmandino was a huge influence on me as well. Just all of their teachings, I would listen to their tapes over and over and over again. And it just really changed the whole path of my life. It changed my thinking. I think one of the important things in life is to understand the difference between context and content. Most people, I think, try to fix their life, if you will, by changing the content in their life. And the content would be, sort of maybe similar to if you look at your living room and you rearrange the furniture. And that's great, right? The room's going to look different. It's going to feel different. It's going to be different if you move the sofa around and the coffee table and the chairs and whatever. But you're still limited by the room itself, right? The room is the context. And that's the way our lives work, because our context of what we believe is possible limits our thinking and constrains our thinking to certain results. And if we're able to somehow expand our context, then we can go to a whole nother level of results. And remember, I've trained thousands and thousands of real estate agents over the years because I used to own a traditional real estate company. I used to be on that speaking circuit. I'm not anymore. I really teach investors now. But in training salespeople, one of the things that's important to grow as a salesperson or any person in any field is to just convince yourself that bigger things are possible. And how do we do that? Well, there are many ways, but one way is we have to see examples of it. And so if you grow up around success and your parents are successful and their friends are successful and your conversations are about big opportunities and growth and possibilities, you're going to be a very different person than if you grow up in the ghetto or the barrio, limitation and survival. It's just a completely different context, right? Now, I didn't grow up in a rich environment at all. I did not have friends that were wealthy. I did not have connections. I did not have any of that. But what really helped me to expand my context was those big motivational speakers, the big four, I call them, right? And through listening to them, I just started to shift my mindset and my context of what I believed was possible. And I think that is critically important. In terms of the training sales agents, I'll just give you one other example. I remember one of my sales agents who had started his career with me years ago. His name was Mike. He was a go-getter. He was ambitious and wanted to achieve more, but was very conservative and came from a conservative background and, didn't really have any reason to believe big things were possible. So I gave him an assignment. I lived in Irvine and Newport Beach, California, in Southern California. And those are pretty rich areas, right? And one of the assignments I had for Mike is I said, Mike, I want you to go to the Four Seasons Hotel in Newport Beach. And I want you to sit in the lobby. And I want you to just sit there for a couple hours. And I want you to watch people. And I want you to study their behavior. I want you to eavesdrop on their conversations. And I want you to just compare those people to the people you're used to, that you're used to hanging out with. And compare those actions, those mannerisms, those conversations, how they dress, how they act, level of confidence, posture, everything. And I want you to just study that, become a student of that behavior for a couple of hours. And he did. And he came back to me and told me all of his revelations, right? And there are many ways we can do this. And now, with the internet and, of course, before that, television, right? We've always had access to this. And so even if we're not in that environment and we don't have those contexts, we can create them virtually. And I think that's very important. Another thing about context, one of the things I always say on my show, and I'm not very positive, actually, in many ways. I'm a bit of a complainer, frankly.
But I guess what I mean is that oftentimes people who are high performers, you're at a higher frequency. You're not going to go down in the sewer and relate to the higher frequency people or things or actions that aren't going to add value or where you can add value. And you just actually played it out beautifully. But yeah, let me hear it. What do you say?
Well, let me give you the flip side of that, right? So I'm really interested in the subject of sociology and culture. That for some reason, I just have a very big interest in it. I'm also very interested in demographics. And I study that a lot because I'm essentially an economist and I teach people about investing and where the market's going and where the economy is going. And that's what I do all the time on my podcast and my YouTube channel and in my coaching and so forth. And I always say on my podcast, the peak of civilization was 1990. And the reason I believe that is because one of the things that really shifted around 1990 was the music. The music had a big change. As a student of economics and a teacher of economics, there is a famous quote that I'm not going to get exactly right, but I think it was by like Baron Rothschild. And the Rothschild family is this, insanely rich family that basically created the central banking system around the world. And, they're insanely rich, this family, right? And a lot of conspiracy theories about the Rothschild family and so forth. And, I won't go down that rabbit hole. But one of the things, I think it was Baron Rothschild who said, let me control the money and I care not who makes the laws. And it just shows you how important it is to have control of the value of money through inflation, deflation, and the printing press, right? And I have a corollary to that quote. I say, let me control the music, and I care not who controls the money or the laws. And that really shifts the culture. And if you look at this throughout history, of course, look at the way Elvis and the Beatles changed the culture, right? And the music really shifted. In the 80s, it was cool to be a winner. It was cool to be a good citizen. And I don't, someone's going to say, there'll be a comment obviously below this video, right? And someone will say, well, Jason, what about the movie Wall Street? Didn't you see that? That guy was a crook. Yeah, I know, whatever, right? But just the general vibe of the culture in the 80s was about improving one's life, right? It was about getting ahead and growing, right? About abundance. And in the 90s, the music changed. We had Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, and we had, I'm not saying exactly 1990, but around then, we had rap and hip hop, and all of the lyrics to this music were awful, right? And it changed the culture dramatically, and the clothing changed, the fashion changed. It was cool to look like an urban gangbanger and to, wear your pants around your knees. And really, like, this whole stupid, pathetic culture evolved, and it was spread by MTV. And Viacom, that owned MTV, that was run by Sumner Redstone, really just spread this whole ethic around the world. I mean, I've been to 87 countries. I was born in Europe. I've been to some of those 87 countries many times over. And you could just see how, like, MTV just spread fashion around the planet. It was amazing how that just, you could go to every country and, like, the kids were all dressing the same, and the whole thing really, really changed. And that represents a shift in context because the music is so powerful and so influential. The music changed China. I mean, I have a friend that owns a few companies and lives in China now, and he used to visit China all the time when he lived in Southern California. And he had a company over there and so forth. And he says, when I went to China in the 80s, you could see the shift coming because you'd see a girl tapping her foot to Western music, right? And you could just see that there's no way they could have maintained the type of communism that they had for decades before that. It was going to shift. And, of course, the Chinese story is well known, but it's just amazing how music changes the world. It really is.
Yeah. Well, you know what I love about that? There's this really awesome book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. If you haven't read that one, I totally recommend, Jason, that'd be a good one.
I have not read that book.
Oh my gosh, you're going to love it.
I love recommendations, so thank you.
Yeah,
I'm going to put it on my list right now.
It's short and sweet, and he's such a brilliant writer. And it really is a study on the social anthropological examination of the importance of tribe. It's Excellent. So phenomenally good. I loved it. Good. You know what I love about your whole conversation about context, and this is beautiful, is that so much of when you're talking about context is exactly what I do as a coach, which is where are we basing our belief system, right? The content of our belief system using your languaging versus the context, which is what is outside of most likely some false belief systems on your limiting sense of self, on seeing yourself as being abundant, as seeing yourself as worthy, as seeing yourself outside of the room of your own conscious understanding. So it's such a beautiful symbolic sense, right? And it's the same way like in our body. Like, yeah, if I lose 20 pounds, these people set these goals. Well, I'm never, even when I was a trainer, I'm never going to give you a diet, because if I can't change the context to which is what you're holding in your room, that is never going to stick. And it's the same thing that applies to developing a business and even having a deeper relationship with God, truthfully. It's like, what context are you looking at your spiritual understanding from your limited human belief? Or are you contextualizing out and seeing really the greater power and the glory of what's around us? It's unbelievable. So who modeled that for you, Jason? Was your mom because you mentioned your mom earlier?
Just a moment. So one thing I just want to make sure I make this point.
Yes.
For anybody listening, like I said earlier, most people try to shift or change the content of life.
Yes.
Right? So your example, losing 20 pounds, right? That's content. Initially,
yes,
getting a new car, a new job, a new relationship. That's all content. Okay. And content is almost always temporary.
Yes.
Because in a certain context, certain content will either flourish or it will die. And if you shift context,
you're going to wear out the sofa
and live forever. It's what?
You're going to wear out the sofa in the new living room, as you said.
Well, all you're doing is moving the sofa around.
Yes. Yeah. It's crazy. I love that. I'm going to use that as image because that's so powerful. So did you come out of the box being able to understand that another level? Or was there something that you saw or desired in that ninth grade? You knew you wanted more, but was there something contextually that you saw that you're like, I want that?
Do you want an honest answer?
Yes,
it's going to sound very shallow.
Please, I need it. You want a hot babe.
Here is my shallow answer. In junior high school, I went to an integrated junior high school in Los Angeles. And so they would bus in the kids from the really bad neighborhoods. I lived near school. I walked to school. But interestingly, the way they were gerrymandering the districts to, with this disastrous social experiment, basically it didn't work. Okay. But, that's when integration was a thing. Okay. The way they were trying to do this, somehow my school district from my, very lower middle class area, that district also pulled in kids from this really rich area. And it had the kids from the really poor areas. And they were all mixed together. Okay. Of course it's cliquey, right? And I just always noticed that there was this group of rich kids that had all the pretty girls. And I wanted to be in that club and I didn't know them. And, I wanted to be part of that group. So I ultimately did kind of become part of that group. And, I was a teenager. And so I, became more conscious of how I dressed and how I couldn't afford nice clothes like they had and, all that stuff. But I wanted to be in this other better group.
Yes,
right?
with the prettier girls. And I would say to you, there's nothing shallow, right? Science has shown that even babies are more attracted to features. And one of the things that I've heard, just because I'm a neuroscience freak, Andrew Huberman, and he said that people who even have tattoos on their face, for us to recognize them as face is very confusing for the brain because we're looking for eyes, nose, mouth. And when there's tattoos, it actually messes up our brain and how we view another human, which I find that to be fascinating.
It probably messes up those facial recognition cameras where the big brother is spying on us too.
Oh, I know. Probably. Maybe that's a piece of it. Oh my gosh.
What was the book you just did? Was that book recommendation there? I want to catch it.
Oh, Andrew Huberman is an incredible Huberman Labs podcast. He's absolutely incredible for the listeners and viewers. Check him out. He brings a regular neuroscience to the everyday people. He's fascinating. So definitely check him out for sure. So how do you define, I have just a few more questions for you, but how do you define success, Jason?
Well, I would copy Earl Nightingale's definition, which is success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And it's definitely not about money. Money is a side effect. Now, when I was younger, it was about money. I mean, I wanted money. There's no question about it. But what you realize is money is just a way to keep score. And it's the way to know if you're doing a good job, basically, right? And it's also a way to have resources, to open doors, to engage in passion projects and influence culture in the world, right? There's another great quote, by the way, and I love quotes, okay? I'll tell you. Quotes and now memes, which is sort of a new version of quotes in the social media era, and song lyrics. They do such a good job of condensing big ideas in small spaces. And so you can just get it in a big idea in a very small package, right? There's this other old quote, money is like alcohol. It makes a bad person worse and a good person better, right? So, like bad people, all they do is magnify themselves through money, or good people magnify themselves through money, right? So at the heart of it, you've got to be a good ethical person, right? But like that old quote by Madame Shanghai Shek about cause and effect, the sun shines on the saint and the sinner alike, right? And that's unfortunate that it does, but it does. That's the way the world works.
True. So did you have a mentor in particular? I'm curious about this because, I wrote that book, Claim Your Inner Warrior, and I interviewed a lot of men around like who was their mentor or role model. Did you have, obviously you mentioned those grade 4, which oftentimes those are when we don't have that in our own homes, but was there anyone in particular that you would say, man, they mentored me or helped me see something more?
You have different influences in your life for different things, right? And of course I had influences like everybody does, but the broad sort of success influences were those big 4 motivational speakers. Yeah. Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, Earl Nightingale, Zig Ziglar were the big shifts at age 17. I'm so glad I discovered them.
That's so great. And what about emotionally? Who was that person for you that mostly connected into your inner self? So was there a person that helped you define that sense of being a man in the world? As just moving as the warrior and as the, being able to speak your truth and be honest and stand up for other people, which is much of what you do in your work.
Yeah, certainly, of course, my mother was a huge influence on me, like anybody's parent would be. But I also had an influence that was not family. I was actually in 6th grade, I was friends with this other family. I was friends with their daughter. This family had 2 daughters, husband and wife. And I think that the father, Jack, maybe wanted a son. Okay. So I was sort of his surrogate son. He really influenced me quite a bit. He was a very ethical person. He was a blue collar person. He owned, like a machine shop. He was the owner of it. So, they had a little bit of money. He was a blue collar guy through and through. And, I remember one time I was helping them with their garage sale. And one of the things he said that influenced me quite a bit is we went around to, and this is the old days, right? So you'd put up signs on telephone poles that would say garage sale, right? Imagine doing that today, like that wouldn't happen. And, so I was riding on the back of his motorcycle. And then he said, well, now we got to go take down the signs. And he always had that really good, like very ethical philosophy. Like, you would never just leave the signs up. That would be littering. You would always clean up after yourself, and you would always pick up your mess, and you'd always do the right thing. So, there were many influences like that, of course. Yeah.
How huge is that, though, from a symbolic perspective? It's like pick up your mess, like always do the right thing. Think about the layers that lesson taught you. It's like, oh, okay. Now
so let's talk about one from television for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. I used to love the show 24 with Jack Bauer, right? Kiefer Sutherland. That show was so addictive. I start watching, like, I remember when a friend gave me the DVDs and I put them in, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't go to sleep till 4 a.m. because you just can't have to watch the next episode. I never, ever had a TV show like that before, right? Anyway, the trait I noticed about that character of Jack Bauer was that he wouldn't do things right, but he would do the right thing. And that's the difference. And I think maybe the great management philosopher and teacher, Peter Drucker, who, by the way, if you have not read Peter Drucker's books, absolute brilliance. Okay. And management everybody's managing something. Okay. So if you think you're not a corporate manager, you should still read Peter Drucker because he's absolutely brilliant. He sort of had this philosophy, or maybe it was Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence. I'm not sure, but one of them, I think it kind of came from them, of, the idea that managers do things right, leaders do the right thing. And there's a big difference of context and content in that type of thinking and philosophy.
Can you expand on that a little bit? In particular, maybe just go back to the show 24. He would not always do say it again, what that was, because it was beautiful.
He wouldn't do things right. He would violate the policy to get the right thing done. And you know who else does that, actually, is the James Bond character.
Yes.
Right? James Bond is always at odds with his organization, with the British government, right? Because he'd always take shortcuts and, do the right thing, but do it wrong, right?
Right.
And the government bureaucrat wants you to do things right.
True that.
Rather than do the right thing. Now, look, we all live under governments, thankfully, and I don't love big government at all. I'm very critical of it, but I do love some government, okay? And we all have rules of society and laws to follow. And so, don't take that to the extreme, but just use it as a guidepost, okay? That's all.
I love that. So just a couple more questions. What would you want a younger person to know? Or let's just say we're looking at you, 20, 30 years ago. What would you tell that younger version of you, Jason?
Well, buy more real estate.
I love it.
Definitely buy and hold more good real estate. That would have been a hugely winning play. And I did win a lot from it, but I could have won a lot more because it's just such a good asset class. And, it's so funny with real estate investors. They always think, no matter when anybody invests or buys property, right? They always think it's too expensive.
Right, always.
But when you look in the rearview mirror, it always looks cheap. And that's one of the things, that perspective, to really, really think about. I have this great poem that I share with my audiences a lot, and it's called The Reluctant Investor, right? And it talks about how everything is so overpriced. All the properties are so overpriced. And it was written in 1977. Mm-hmm. Everybody always thinks that at the time they invest. Mm-hmm. But like emotional wounds and financial wounds, time heals all wounds. And that's the important thing to understand about investing. So I would certainly have purchased more properties, probably taken more risk. I've, always been pretty conservative. I don't know, in some ways I'm not that conservative, but in other ways I am, I guess. Like a mixed bag, like anybody. But
yeah. I love that. So what would you say then, if you were to had a billboard in Times Square? We're just going to put that out there. What would you want that billboard to say?
Yeah,
from Jason Hartman.
I just think maybe it's the idea. Here's a movie one that really influenced me. Okay, now this is going to sound dumb at first, but here it is. It's the movie. You ready? Cocktail. Movie Cocktail with Tom Cruise. Does anybody remember that movie?
I do.
Old one. Okay. Well, in that movie, his business professor had an assignment, and he said to the class, write your obituary. That's a good assignment. And really, what do you want your life to mean? Write your obituary long before, hopefully, it will be applicable.
Right.
And, that really, really gives you a chance to reflect on where you're going, why you're doing what you're doing, and things like that. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was always a big fan and student of the philosophers. I really love philosophy. I remember I don't have time to anymore, but I used to read philosophy books, and I used to go to B. Dalton bookstore and sit on the stacks of books and read philosophy books,
Sounds like heaven.
I couldn't afford to buy them, right? And anyway, one branch of philosophy that's interesting that you can learn a lot from, of course, is Stoicism, right? There's this Stoic saying, which is Memento mori. And it means remember your death.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people would perceive that as, oh gosh, this is really morbid. Why are you saying this? That's very depressing. But it's not depressing. Look, nobody ever gets out alive. None of us are getting out of this alive. And when you think about your death, you also think about your life, of course, and what did it mean? I think we're really all here to do something meaningful. And that meaning isn't make a bunch of money. Okay. That's never going to be the meaning in and of itself. But the money is a proxy for other meanings. Okay. And it is a scorecard. And I think that is a legitimate pursuit, and it will come as a result of doing something worthwhile.
I think that that's a beautiful way to summarize that, because I think that we have such a negative connotation. And that goes back to the context image, right? That here we don't want to think of the end or death contextually, like actually looking at our lives, looking at the room or the vessel to which we lived our life. And how do we want to enrich it and grow it and perceive it? And who are we inviting in, right? I think that's the most important piece, that we've moved past Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the hierarchy is at the end, self-actualization. That I think
that's interesting you bring that up. Let's talk about Maslow for a moment, because I have a beef with Abraham Maslow.
Absolutely. And I do too.
I don't think that is the highest level, by the way. Of course, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we've all studied, at the bottom of that pyramid, you've got the basics, right? Food, clothing, shelter. And then you move up that pyramid, there's the need for recognition and acceptance, all of these things, right? I think that Maslow missed two important things in his self-actualization pyramid. One is, and I don't know how to say this in a sort of the same way, but I think humans have an innate desire, and it's very well documented throughout history, to change their state. Mm-hmm. And they do it in all sorts of ways. They do it through eating food, ingesting drinks. They do it through exercise. They do it through motion. Going on a roller coaster is changing your state dramatically through just motion. They do it through psychedelic drugs. They do it in all sorts of ways. I've had Stephen Kotler, the author, on my show a few times, and he wrote a book about it called Catching Fire. And there's a lot written about this now, that a lot of these psychedelic drugs, which, by the way, I'm not into this, but I'd really like to try it, frankly. I just haven't, okay? But I do think it's a legitimate study. But I think the general idea of changing your state and a rational amount of healthy escapism, I think is actually quite healthy. I don't think it's a bad thing. Now, I think it's a bad thing when people make it their life, but I think everybody needs to escape a bit. It's like rebooting your phone or rebooting your computer. Every once in a while, it needs a reboot, and it needs to sort of clear out the cache, right? That cache memory, they call it, if you're a technical person. And that's what you do when you reboot, you sort of reset. Absolutely. And I think Maslow totally missed that.
Yeah. And then it's so funny. I look at it like the pinnacle of self-actualization is actually not the pinnacle. I look at it as contribution as the highest level, because it's like Buddha. Buddha said, I'm awake, right? But it didn't necessarily mean enlightenment or a new level of unconscious or connection to God or whatever. But I think that self-actualization, we get there by rest, by, maybe psychedelics, but whatever the ways are of I'm awake.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Like sleep is changing your state dramatically. 100%. I mean, you ever really enjoyed your sleep and had great dreams, and you work a lot of things out in your dreams, right?
Yes, it's so good. Yes, but I think that the big point, I guess, is that I think that we're called here, as you were saying earlier, to have an effect on people. And money is a beautiful way to use energy. And, as the saying goes, you can go across town, in a bus or a Mercedes, but Mercedes is just way more comfortable, And, so I just think that that's kind of funny. But
sure.
Yeah.
So the other one, Maslow, let me talk to you about the other one Maslow missed real quick.
Good, go for it.
And I think the other one he just totally missed was actualization in God. And
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Spiritual actualization.
Self-actualization, and then boom, It's the opening of the higher realm. And I'll tell you, younger people understand that. They have a deeper sense of the higher mind. I know, you know about my son. My son understood that there was so much more than what we are just experiencing in this room on the world. And so I hook on to his understanding and awareness and conscious understanding as I've lifted out of just not only just self-actualization, but a deeper understanding and connection to the higher force of God. So
so that's above self-actualization. I agree. That's spiritual actualization. Yeah.
Let's call it, Jason. Yeah.
Maslow, I'm telling you, Maslow missed out on two big things.
It was 1940 something. We're going to give him a break. It was 70 years ago, and personal and the whole evolution of consciousness is now a beautiful thing, how much we know about outside. And I love it, Jason. I think you and I got to write a couple articles on the relationship between context and consciousness and awareness and understanding. It's really fascinating to me how I get what you're saying, and I'm applying it to all of my own personal philosophy. So super fun stuff. Is there anything that you'd like to say to our guests and viewers in parting words for us, Jason?
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered all of this stuff really well. I like a Zen saying very well, which is to know and not to do is to not yet know. We encounter a lot of people in our lives, and we've all been this person at times too, but hopefully we don't stay that person. And that is the person who kind of knows it all, but they're not practicing it all. The world rewards the doer. There is an innate wisdom just in doing, in and of itself. The action is just innately valuable, even when it's the wrong action.
True. Yeah. Taking action. And as the saying goes, our success has been paved in the most beautiful and magnificent failures. And as Les Brown says, when life knocks you down, make sure you fall on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up.
My name is Andrew, and I live in the Pacific Northwest. So far, I've got 6 properties in about 3.5 years, and I'm pretty happy about it. And it's all because his team of experts and just his knowledge and his time that he spent doing it. He can really guide you through it, and his podcast is excellent. And I highly recommend it for anybody, whether you're a beginner or an expert. There's a ton to learn there, and it'll help you get to the next level.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.